So there's two microphones, one for Jordan and Dashrai and one for you two. Would you like a water? Welcome, everyone. We'll invite you to, we'll give people one more minute to come in from the hallway and then we'll get started. All right. Van Gwinzi, good morning and welcome to this panel. My name is Devlin Fernandez. I serve as Executive Director of Gwich'in Council International, and it is our pleasure to be here in beautiful Sapmi territory, in Rumsa Trumsa, and at Arctic Frontiers. Merci Cho for having us. We bring regrets from our board member, Charlene Fisher, who was supposed to join us in person, but we have an incredible panel lined up for you today, and I am very proud and thrilled to present my colleagues. I will ask them to introduce themselves so you can hear from them right off, and then we will dive into some of this exciting work. We'll start with Jordan.
Good morning, everyone. Jordan Peterson. I'm Gwich'in from Aklavik, Northwest Territories, former Deputy Grand Chief of the Gwich'in Tribal Council, former co-chair of Gwich'in Council International. Also served as senior Arctic official for GCI and head of delegation on numerous trips. And I currently reside in Whitehorse and father of a few Gwich'in rock stars.
Hello everyone, my name is Dashrai Alexander. I'm from Gwich'in, Fort Yukon, Alaska. I'm the one of the youth delegates for GCI. And yeah, I graduated in May, and I graduated with a 7-episode screenplay featuring an Indigenous heroine, and then I partnered with an animator to make a trailer for the pilot episode of hopefully what will become an animated show.
Van Gwinzi, good morning, everyone. I appreciate you all joining us. My name is Chris Statnick. I am Vanta Gwich'in, a citizen of the Vanta Gwich'in First Nation. My home community is Old Crow, Yukon, which is in the far north of the Yukon Territory in Canada. Usually when I introduce myself, even though some in the room might not know who my relatives are, my grandparents were the late Dr. Reverend Ellen Bruce and Robert Bruce Sr., and my other grandmother is Agnes Mills, who are all Vanta Gwich'in and have their connections in Old Crow, Yukon.
Good morning. My name is Oscar Gamlin. My family's from Sigachuk, but I was raised in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm a paramedic working in northern Saskatchewan in the Yukon. I'm a zoology student at the University of Calgary.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to come in and grab seats. You can sit in the front row if you would like. Okay. So today we are going to talk about Gwich'in sovereignty, values, knowledge systems, and priorities. Before we dive into that, we are going to kind of situate ourselves in the Gwich'in homelands. So we're going to show a short video.
Quiet the set! Understand!
Gwich'in, it means north Everybody's named after what they do with animals or just the style of living on the land. And so they'll know who you are because there's so many people in the north at different places, and so everybody go by names. So she, James, Itse Valji. My name is James Itse. Itse means your heir. In Gwich'in, Itse. I think there's like 15 of us in the family. That's lots. I'm the oldest one. I'm born 1941. My birthplace is in the Clavik. My dad took my mum to Clavik with dog team. It's no airplane some days. Then my dad and mum brought me to Old Crow. It's 300 miles by a dog team, sitting in the toboggan. It took a week to make that trip. I like going on the land to hunt and fish and trap. I like eating country food. I got my first caribou when I was 11 years old. In them days, the caribou was plentiful. All our life we lived like this in the tents. No houses, no floor, there's branches. The life is changing. Your life is different to mine. I used to eat the rabbit, now you keep it for your pet. My grandparents taught me how to behave myself and show me the land. They didn't go to the store and buy turkey, so they had to cut moose head up and keep it for your grandma or your friends. And that's when you hunt. Whenever you hunt, there's parts that are kept to special people. I didn't know I was going to say this today. You're here, so that's the main thing. You're in a safe place. That's why it's here. And you guys are very lucky to have this close to community, and then you get all the advice, which we had to work to get those advice. It's very important that the people go back to on the land living. Be a good leader. When you have money, don't spend it foolishly. Love everybody. Give your friends good words. It's a blessing what you are, how you live. We still carry it on till today. Carry that same life of fire and surviving. Chuk sugai lei chai chai we see a good day Shilakat Akot to go out she called Mukwenjit. They do le called Mukwenjit. Mukwenjit. They could to go quietly. Where's that's it.
that video was created through one of the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group projects, where we supported youth filmmakers in community to be storytellers. And what a beautiful film that helps share a little bit about one area of the Gwich'in homelands. I'm going to then put Chris, Dajrai, and Jordan up next to tell us a little bit about your home communities and kind of paint the picture. We are in beautiful Sapmi territory now, but what is it like in the Gwich'in homelands? Oh, oops, how do I go to this? There we go.
Yeah, so you had an opportunity to watch the film, and the territory featured in there is my home territory, Vanta Gwich'in traditional territory. As I mentioned, it's in the far north Yukon, and our village is Old Crow, or in our language, Tichik. And it's situated on where the Porcupine River meets the Crow River. And historically, it was a fishing site. And it wasn't really until 1920s that it became a permanent village site where our people now live. Prior to that, our people, as James was explaining, lived out on the land throughout the years, traveling around to different places, traveling far distances by dog team, following the caribou, going to our fishing sites, going to our trapping spots. Vanta Gwich'in, as James said, Gwich'in actually means people. So, I mean, in some respects, we're all Gwich'in here. But Vanta Gwich'in means people of the lakes, or people of the many lakes, as it's been translated. And if you were looking on that map, and as you can kind of see around north of Old Crow there, the lakes indicated there. We have thousands of lakes in a wetlands complex called Crow Flats, and for our elders, and continuing today, it continues to be a rich source of sustenance. It's rich in biodiversity. There's millions of birds that migrate and return to Crow Flats every year from places all over the world. We're also situated along the Porcupine Caribou's migratory range, which you see on this map, two things, an outline of our homelands and an outline of the Porcupine Caribou migratory range. And you see that they almost nearly mirror each other. And this gives you a sense of our identity as caribou people. For thousands and thousands of years, our people have depended on this porcupine caribou herd to sustain our way of life. Every spring, the caribou travel from the Canadian side in what is their wintering grounds up to the coastal plain of Alaska, where they have their calves. And then in the fall time, they return again, passing along our villages. Harvesting and maintaining that relationship with the caribou has been a central part of our existence as Vanta Gwich'in, and as you'll hear from others, for all Gwich'in. So that's just a bit about my community. Old Crow itself is there's about 300 people living in the village now. There's no roads into Vanta Gwich'in territory. It's only accessible by airplane or traveling by boat or on the land to get there. So that existence, our circumstances today keep us very close to the land. The cost of living in our communities is very high. We have one grocery store. A gallon of milk can be $20. So it's impossible for our people to simply just live out of the grocery store. We have to maintain our connection to the land, connection to the caribou, and connection to the salmon to, maintain our well-being. So it's a little bit about my home.
I'm from Fort Yukon, Alaska, and it's the largest Gwich'in rural village in the interior with about 600 people. And Fort Yukon is called Fort Yukon because the French fur traders set up a fort there. And that kind of became like a hub for trading and everything. And then there was a hospital established there. And so everyone from like nearby would seek treatment there. And that's kind of how the village became established. Um, yeah, most graduating classes in high school are like 4 to 6 people. So it's extremely small. And we're very sports centric. So, because we're also landlocked, just like Chris's community. So we get to fly out for basketball trips and stuff, and that's a really amazing way to meet other youth, especially Gwich'in youth from other areas. Yeah, so sports are very big. We are also subsistence hunter fishers, and the salmon are really important to us. We hunt and trap for everything, and we also have a really big emphasis on like training the youth in that. And so, as I was telling him earlier, there are a lot of elders who will like negotiate with the school system and ask if they can like take us out trapping or like take us out to a camp, and then like they get to take all the kindergartners or whatever to like go like build fires or like survival forts and stuff. And yeah, it's just like a really beautiful community, and yeah, I love it.
And I'm from Clavic, Northwest Territories, which is east of Old Crow and the most northern of the Gwich'in communities, aside from Nuvik. And Clavic is situated on the west side of the Mackenzie River in the Beaufort Delta, which is the second largest delta on the planet. And we, like Fort Yukon and Old Crow and our brothers and sisters in the other Gwich'in communities, have relied on our ecosystem and being a very active part in it. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this today, but I think just to pass it over to my colleague here, that without our participation in the ecosystem, it's our way of managing and understanding and knowing what the porcupine caribou population is to salmon, and the need for that subsistence use is important to our identity. And as we're talking today, I want to ask you a question to think about in terms of your own identity. It was a question that was asked of me by Gwich'in Elder Sarah Jerome on December 2nd, 2013. And it is, what does it mean to be proud to be Gwich'in? And I ask you that, to think about your own identity, whether you be Inuit, whether you be Athabascan, whether you be Norwegian or Sami, and how that relates to our story and where we come from. We are all people of the land, regardless of our ethnicity, and think about that question as we have this engaging conversation.
Merci, Joe. So we've heard a lot already this week about security and sovereignty and some of the challenges and some of the actions that people are taking in the name of security and sovereignty. But Gwich'in notions of security and sovereignty are very different from state notions. And so I'm going to open it up to the panel to offer your perspectives on Gwich'in sovereignty.
Sure, I'll begin. I'm a lawyer by training, and I work in the field of Indigenous rights. So the words sovereignty and self-determination, you become familiar with these terms, but they are often usually defined and understood as in international legal frameworks and so forth as sovereignty in relation only to nation states. And when I think about this question of what does Gwich'in sovereignty mean, I think about the fact that we've lived and survived and governed ourselves in our homelands for thousands of years, long before the creation of any nation state, long before the arrival of Europeans to our homelands. And what does it mean to be a sovereign people in our land throughout that history? To me, when we hear sovereignty, I mean, you you probably couldn't go 2 minutes in this conference without hearing those words, sovereignty, spoken. But usually they're understood in terms of some form of ownership or control or dominion over that's asserted. And when I think about our forms of sovereignty, they're much, much different. As I think James's film demonstrates, it's about our relationships to one another, as families, as communities, as a nation, but not just also our relationships as people, our relationship to the specific territories we belong to, our relationships to the caribou, to the salmon, our relations to everything. And how our people have maintained and carried forward and tended to those relationships throughout that long history. And for me, it's based on our values, our values that we continue to practice today, basic values such as respect, caring, sharing. Our elders will even say laughter is one of our values, joking, telling stories. This is what defines us. As Gwich'in, we have our own specific territories, our own specific dialects of the Dinjiju language, but we're all connected through this sort of web of relationships. So that's what I think about when I think about Gwich'in sovereignty. I also think about the impacts to our forms of sovereignty that occurred through colonization. It's just past 200 years now. I think last year was the 200-year anniversary of when sovereignty was first asserted over our homelands, first by the British on the Canadian side, and at that time Russia in Alaska. And the sort of process of colonization that followed those assertions really had an effect of severing some of those relationships, whether we think about the border between the Yukon and Alaska, which you see sort of dissecting the middle of our territory on the map, and the enforcement of colonial laws and policies on either sides of that border that followed, including in Canada we had the Indian residential school system, and in Alaska there was the Indian boarding school system, where children, young children, my own grandfather as an example, were taken at a young age away as part of a program of assimilation, of trying to kill the Indian in the child, in the words of the Canadian government in those days. And how that these other forms of state sovereignty work to really try and sever these connections. And so a big part of our work today as Gwich'in, as we are now generations from some of those experiences, is reclaiming and reuniting each other. It's really a practices of reunification and revitalizing based on these values that we continue to maintain. So yeah, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, thanks for all that, Chris. And I think what's really amazing about what we've heard so far and the map is that as Gwich'in, we all have one same relationship, and that's the relationship to the porcupine caribou. Over the last couple of days, meeting with folks and re-engaging in the work of the Arctic and the need for respectful dialogue and cooperation, it reminds me of Lisa Murkowski's video yesterday, the senator from Alaska. And when you look at that map, right at the top, it says the Brooks Range and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou. And in 2018, the US government put forward a budget that was supported by Lisa Murkowski to open up that specific place for oil and gas development in Alaska. And over the last 50, 60 years, Gwich'in have been traveling to Washington to lobby the House of the House, as well as the Senate, as well as other political bodies with our partners to try to protect this place, primarily because of our relationship with caribou and how that relates to our identity and our sovereignty as people, but also as being responsible stewards of the land and of the ecosystems that make up our territory. In the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it's not just home to caribou, it's home to almost every migratory bird on the planet. And it's a story that has been told by representatives from the state of Alaska, from the United States government, that opening up a place like this is in the best interest of our futures. And when this budget was introduced and when Trump was first president, we came to the realization that lobbying Washington wasn't going to work anymore. And so we changed our strategy. We actually started lobbying every investment bank in the US and Canada, which led to 5 banks in Canada and 5 investment firms in the United States creating a new Arctic investment policy, which meant that they would not invest in new oil and gas development in the Arctic. And Gwich'in punch above their weight. We're the most northern First Nation in the world. We come to spaces like this with our friends, Arctic Athabascan Council, ICC, the Sami, etc., to focus on the things that bring us together rather than the things that divide us. And I think the Arctic states can learn a lot from that. And scientists can learn a lot from that. And the need for deeper cooperation to focus on the things that allow us to continue the good work that we do through working groups of the Arctic Council as an example. But more importantly, the work that Indigenous people are doing right now to reclaim has been taken from us through colonialism, but also the need for us to rebuild the relationships amongst each other in the same way that we hold that relationship with caribou. And for me, that's the true definition of Gwich'in sovereignty, is understanding that we all come from the same place, that our creation story and our relationship with the porcupine caribou, with Wadzai is paramount to our own ability to relate, because as long as we remember that and we remember that relationship and continue to do that in a good way, that our nation will start coming back together in the way that caribou do once a year.
So we've touched a little bit on, so thank you for the comments on sovereignty. I'm also going to pull up the notion of Gwich'in values. And Chris raised these values: respect, sharing, caring, laughter, as well as James in the video. And when I look at this panel, there are, you're all demonstrating service and responsibility and living Gwich'in values in the ways that you work, volunteer, conduct yourselves. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the sort of notion of responsibility and service, and whether you want to speak about Gwich'in values or a lesson learned or a mentor that has shared some of these values with you. If we want to start with Oscar.
Sure. I don't think there's anything too complicated about the motivation to be a good person and to be of service to the community around you. The values that were listed there, they're not specific to the Gwich'in people. I think they're very general and immediately recognizable to aspire towards. Acting in a good way, I think everyone has an understanding of what that means, and I try to follow it myself. I think most people agree with that.
Yeah, when I think about responsibility, it comes with freedom in my understanding of it. In my community, we signed a self-government agreement in the 90s with the government of Canada, but of course, we've been self-governing for our entire existence. But that is not so much as a right as it is a responsibility from a Gwich'in perspective, my perspective. In order to enjoy the sovereignty, in order to enjoy greater autonomy comes responsibility. And that's really been instilled in me by my elders. I think of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, even though I didn't know some of them personally, I was born after them. Their living memory still exists in our village through our oral history and through their teachings that they've passed down to their children, which have been passed down to their children. And so I often think of myself as existing in this continuum of not just the elders before me, but also the young people that are coming after me. So I find my sense of responsibility and comes from knowing my history, knowing my family history, knowing how my ancestors survived and allowed me to be here today, given some of the harsh environment and times that they lived through. I'm also now a father. My son is now 10 years old, and since becoming a father, I've also had a greater appreciation of that looking forward and what are we leaving behind? What are we instilling in our young people today? What are we giving them to also be guided by this sense of our values and our responsibility so that they can live full lives? In Gwich'in culture, it used to be the practice of when you became a father of your first child, you would actually take the name of your first child and add father of at the end. And so I often reflect on that of how becoming a father is a bit of a transition for myself of not just looking back, but now looking forward.
When I think of responsibility, I think it's really important to understand where I came from. So I am the only young person to have graduated Fort Yukon High School in the last 30 years to attend college and to go all the way through and graduate. And there were a lot of obstacles to that. And so in some way, COVID was very fortunately timed for me, which seems wrong to say. But since there was COVID, we had to do online school. And so the government finally gave us all access to internet. And how can you apply for college without internet these days, right? And so that was one barrier that I was able to overcome that I might not have otherwise. And so many of my peers share. And then even have to have a computer that's 15 years or younger. So that's a technological barrier that not a lot of people could overcome. And I also had a mother who had gone to college, and so she walked me through the application and helped me apply for funding and scholarships and explained how it worked. And so I was in this really uniquely supported position to be able to go to college, and that privilege means that it is my responsibility to give back to my community because I had that opportunity and not a lot of people do. So I need to use it to help my community to expose more people like me to opportunities like the ones that I've had. And that's social responsibility, and it's also driven by just a love for my people and my community, because I could easily not go back home ever, but how could I do that knowing that so many people supported me and they would come up to me in the street and just be like, hey, we're so glad that you're going, please come back, study whatever you want. do whatever you want, but the fact that you're doing this is amazing, and we're so proud of you. And so when I think of responsibility, I think of my responsibility to the people who have supported me.
Thanks for sharing. I have a 19-year-old daughter as well, who's currently living in Vancouver, doing her thing, and I think about that responsibility too, being a kid from a Klavic that had access to a winter road to Inuvik or opportunity to travel as a youth, but the realization that many young people from our communities don't ever leave or don't go past Inuvik. And Inuvik is another Gwich'in community of 3,500 people, but and a government hub that was created in the 1950s because of flooding in Aklavik. And sorry, I'm thinking about your story and how this aspect of what doing things in a good way is. And me and Chris have had long night conversations about this idea of what that is. And to be honest, it's probably the toughest thing to do, because we're pulled in so many different ways of politics and family situations and community situations, and you know, I've been fortunate to travel by boat from Old Crow to Fort Yukon, and it's a very different reality than what I grew up in the type of support that our Alaskan communities get from the state. And I want to say thank you for reminding me that that responsibility of giving thanks to those that support us.
We are so proud of both Dajrai and Oscar for being here, and the continued, I think, commitment to learn, to serve, to think about, you know, what being Gwich'in means going forward, and in this Arctic context, where one of the quotes that stood out for me earlier this week was, you know, is the Arctic the new kind of global frontier? Well, it's been Gwich'in homelands for, you know, millennia. The Arctic is changing. You know, we've also heard about many of the kind of ecosystem impacts and social impacts from wildfires, from permafrost thaw, from smoke, from all sorts of things. And I'm just wondering, again, I'll sort of open up the panel to speak about some of the challenges you've seen, changes you've seen, priorities you see going forward.
We'll start, and we'll make our way west. So I come from, again, a community of, and my nation in Canada has 4 communities: Klavic, Inuvik, Sigachik, and Fort McPherson, or Ted Leger. And we signed a comprehensive land claim agreement with the government of Canada in 1992. And I was 5 years old at the time, and Bobby Joe Greenland, who was the Grand Chief when I was the Deputy Grand Chief, would joke a lot that Canada views that agreement as a divorce while we view it as a marriage. And that starting place is very, very far apart. And the reason that our people decided to take this path of negotiating and signing a land claim agreement over the last 33 years is primarily because of oil and gas development. in the Mackenzie Valley. And a process called the Berger Inquiry, and another process called COPE. And I really encourage you to look up both of those things to understand the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of stories that were told over a couple-month process. And regardless of what Thomas Berger said at the end, what informs that is the change that my grandfather, my grandmother, that generation, their parents and their parents have seen from 1867 to the 1970s. And that is one of, could you imagine being born in a canoe and dying watching cable? And the change that our people saw, that my great-grandmother saw, Sarah Ann Gardlin, who was my biggest influence and is a constant reminder of why I do what I do. And the changes that she would tell me about, and you know, her husband, Carl Gardlin, who's Swedish, having participated in something like the Hunt for the Mad Trapper, and to her kids being born in a boarding school, and because they had a white father, did not have to go to residential school. While on my grandpa's side, on my dad's, or my mom's dad, on that side of the family, having spent multiple generations, and my mom being literally going to Grolier Hall, which closed in 1996. And if we think that these things were so long ago, it was the same year as the Arctic Council. And that level of change, I think, in just our society and who we are and how we show up is biggest, aside from all of the climate change impacts and things that we see on the land. And why the question that I shared at the start of this is so important, because it's a reminder for us to like Chris was sharing, the responsibility that we need to know where we come from, that we need to know who our family is and how they interrelate, also so that we don't intermarry. Because, you know, when all jokes aside, that change, when you really think about it, that our people have seen, and that my territory so deeply impacted by the church. Our elders believed that we did not drum. And it I don't think it's necessarily a belief that they had. It was beaten out of them. And it's a hard reality to think about, that Indigenous people of the circumpolar world have all gone through the exact same boarding school, residential school experience. And that change that they have seen and that we've seen, and we're trying to piece all back together, I think is really astounding to try to fully comprehend. That one story of a child being taken from any community, any parent, is too much, because could you imagine a community without children's laughter?
I think another thing that's important to remember when understanding Indigenous perspectives, and especially Gwich'in, is that so many of us passed away from sickness. We lost 3/4 of our population, and I don't have much more to say than that, but I think that it demonstrates the strength that we're that our people have that we're here today, because we lost so many of our members, but we managed to stay strong. We're at the Arctic Council. We have huge voices, and yeah, we still have a lot of our culture and our traditions, and some of that is we do have difficulty maintaining, but there are so many people who are interested, and we still have such strong communities.
Yeah, just reflecting on the question and listening to my fellow Gwich'in speak, in my village, we had our first TV in 1970 in the village. We had one, it was in the community hall, and people would all go there and gather for the one channel or whatever that we would receive. And, there's still people in our village living today that, grew up living, traveling on the land by dog team, living that way of life. And the amount of rapid change lives is really astonishing. It's important, I think, to kind of situate our history and the history of colonization happening kind of much later than it did in other places of the world. Up in our area, it was perhaps the final frontier in some respects of colonization. And it didn't happen that long ago, as they've been reflecting. And with that, we've also seen great changes in the land and the environment. Our territory is permafrost. We're now seeing the thawing of permafrost, which has real impacts. There's an example in our territory where essentially overnight an entire lake, which was a lake which a family would go to every year for trapping, it drained essentially overnight, just because of the thawing permafrost in the earth, basically acting like a sponge. And the sadness of them returning to that place of nourishment, of well-being, of being there with their family, sharing language, transmitting the culture to their children, not being able to go to that place again. And so, all of these impacts are interrelated, whether they're the land or to us as peoples. We actually have, stories and knowledge that's being reclaimed now about even our knowledge of the stars. I heard Chief Bill Erasmus talking earlier about his elders, noticing that even the sky is changing, the stars, and as we're reclaiming this knowledge, there's prophecies about changing because of our conduct on Earth as humans, as people, and so that what we do as Gwich'in, as all humans, has an impact on the Earth and on the people. And there's been a lot said about the residential school experience, and so, George mentioned the last school in Canada closing in '96. I was born in 1987, and I didn't learn about residential schools, despite my own grandfather and many of my other relatives, having that experience. I didn't learn about that till I was an adult. I didn't learn about it in school, and it wasn't talked about within our family because of the trauma and that was associated with that experience. And I'm now a father, as I mentioned, and my son, who's when he was 6, he started first learning about residential schools. And so I also see that change, a positive change in terms of the awareness and consciousness of our young people, of understanding our history, and how we got to where we are today. And I think that is a really beautiful thing, to see young people breaking cycles, reclaiming their identity, answering that question for themselves. What does it mean to be proud to be Gwich'in? I see that as a really positive change that makes me very hopeful. So that's one change I wanted to talk about. It's not all doom and gloom. There are, beautiful changes happening as well.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. That's obviously made clear here, where all these issues can be brought to light to people that might not normally be made aware of them. It's clear that the capture of resources and the mobilization of industry is really pushing things rapidly. That makes it almost impossible for people to adapt to. But even if that's historically been for the worst and led to things being in the state they are, there's definitely things going in a good direction. And it's not that long ago that the initiative to go for further development in the 1002 lands was planned, and I think there's good chance that that will happen, and it'll continue to have negative impact on the people in those areas. But through the experiences that have happened in the last century, the communities are more prepared to take those changes in stride and try to push for dual development. And it's hopefully going to go in a better direction going forward.
I'm going to change one of the questions because I thinking about the strength, thinking about young people, thinking about the fact we have folks who started careers working like kind of as youth leaders early with Jordan and Chris, and now two youth delegates with GCI. I'm going to put Jordan and Chris on the spot of, what advice would you give to young people? And to Dajrai and Oscar, what supports do you need?
Yeah, thanks, Devlin. And Devlin asked me this question earlier during our breakfast meeting, and I shared with Dajrai that don't wait for permission ever to step into your own power, because if we wait for our politicians to step aside, we'll be waiting forever. And I think that responsibility that we have as elected leaders when we are in these positions, and the way that has been taught to me, is that the work that you're doing is to build capacity in the next generation. And if we aren't reminded of that every day, we often get stuck in the cycle of to be blunt, the old boys club. And I don't think we need that anymore. I think we have amazing youth like Dara and Oscar to be able to step into leadership roles, elected or not, and that you don't need to wait for permission from any of us to be able to do that. That is your self-determined and inherent right.
Yeah, I was actually telling them at breakfast, I don't think I have any advice. I think you could do my job already. I should have seen him joining us in meetings and, the great questions and insights they had for, politicians and diplomats. It was powerful to witness. So, I don't have, much advice. I can share a bit about, the advice I was given. And, as a young person, with a sense of responsibility to your community and the challenges that exist in our communities, there's often an urge to that you need to be there right now, and you need to be there all the time. And it sounds counterintuitive, but my advice is see the world, to go out and meet other people, because in my experience, going out into the world and seeing other cultures, seeing other ways of life, it only brings into focus how special our homelands are, how unique of a people we are, how rich we are as a people, and how lucky we are to be able to continue to exist on our homelands, to continue to have a sense of community, culture, values that binds and ties us together. And, it's not about going out and acquiring knowledge from other institutions or places that makes you important, or having something to contribute, just by being who you are, grounded in your family and your community, is what is going to always be there for you, no matter what. And so, yeah, my advice is to go and see the world, and eventually, you'll be home. It's always there. So that's my advice.
From the youth perspective, I think that one thing that GCI has done that's amazing, and something that I personally needed, was the fact that they offer opportunities like this every single year. Because 2 years ago, I also applied and got accepted, but then it was -45 and the planes weren't flying, so I wasn't able to make it. And I was so disappointed because I had prepped and I was really looking forward to it. Um, and then I was like in school, so I couldn't go the next year. And so I finally have had the opportunity to go. And where else would I find an opportunity like this to be around so many amazing people and learn how things work? And so I would say, as someone who's really benefited from just like repeat opportunities for exposure, that's really important, because eventually there's going to be someone who like takes that opportunity and gets everything they can out of it, and even like at this conference, people are talking about wildfires and I'm like, oh, like, okay. But then they start talking about renewable energy and I'm like, I need to talk to you. So I think exposing young people to all different types of ideas and kind of like helping us find out how we want to contribute to our community and like what avenues are available can also be really helpful, because sometimes you don't even know what exists until people show you that that's their job.
The question was advice for the youth, but
Oh,
I can definitely
and
express some
what
appreciation.
supports do you need?
What
No?
supports do I need? I really didn't know what this experience would hold when I was coming into it, and I honestly couldn't have expected it to have this much potential. Being able to be in the room with people in leadership positions, politicians, scientists, the level of exposure here, I don't know if it can be found anywhere else. This really is the perfect opportunity to move forward, develop a deeper understanding of what's needed to push certain issues and how those issues can actually find progress. I don't think you could offer any better support to the youth than this experience.
All right, thank you. Now we are going to sort of look at kind of some of the current activities and going forward. And we've heard a lot about some of the concerns. We've talked about some of the strengths and identity. But I'm just wondering if you can share a few examples of some of the activities that are happening either at the governance level or some of the work that's going on, that may speak to the work of the nation.
Yeah, I'll give an example. Something that Gwich'in Council International is, working with our communities on. We've been talking a lot about the porcupine caribou and the threats of development. In 1988, there was a Gwich'in gathering hosted in Arctic Village, Alaska, Vajrayko, and it was the first time that Gwich'in from all of our communities had gathered together in one place in probably over a century, because of, like I mentioned, the impacts of the border, but it was our concern for the threats to the caribou which brought us together again. And every 2 years since 1988, we've been gathering again, and we rotate Gwich'in villages that host the gathering. And in our recent gatherings, the discussion evolved to still be about caribou, but also other emerging priorities that are common across our communities. And at the Gwich'in gathering in Old Crow, in my village, in 2022, there was a accord that was developed and adopted by consensus of the Gwich'in participating. And that accord really sought to define what are these common issues or priorities that can start to reunify us as a people and strengthen us as one people with one homeland, with one language. And so that accord identified things like cross-border mobility, our ability to simply travel across that border and share our culture, maintain our relationships with one another as Gwich'in. Climate change, something affecting each of our communities, each of our territories. Language revitalization, bringing together the work that's going on across the nation to, bring together fluent speakers and teachers to share practices and approaches so that we can, work together stronger in revitalizing our language. Porcupine caribou, the Yukon River salmon, which is experiencing declines, and as well the mental, the health and well-being of our people. How can we work on these priorities together? So that accord is now something that we are working on implementing with all of our communities. And as Gwich'in Council International, it serves as a bit of a guide for us on what are the priorities of our nation, what are the things that we speak with one voice on for our common interests. So that work is, it's in its, early stages, but I think of that as, a beacon of hope for our young people, a message to them, and future generations that, we've come together and we've identified these things that, are so important to all of us that, we can work towards together, in building up.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. And I think I kind of want to bring it back to the 2016 Gwich'in Gathering in Vashrai Co as well. It was the first time in 30 years since the original gathering in 1988 that our people came together in this very special place called Vashrai Co. And during that gathering, there was a lot of young leaders that went to it that were newly elected, like myself, to think about how we come together and how we work together. And after that week and during that week, we came up with a declaration called the Nainli Declaration. And within that, there's one I think has like really spoken to me the most about that kind of ties together our conversation today, which is that Gwich'in will define its own measures of success. And that's really important because of, one of the reasons that I'm here at Arctic Frontiers this year is with my partners at Northern Energy Innovation and the work that they do with Old Crow, with Vantat Gwich'in, with my own community and other Indigenous communities across the Canadian Arctic around renewable energy, around energy security, and the importance of, that we as Gwich'in are moving forward in our own way, that we're not looking to the government or we're not looking to anyone except ourselves to really define who we are, our own measures of success, the projects that we want to take on, like the accord that happened in Old Crow and all the work that's come from it, including all the work with GCI, that as we look forward to all of the challenges that have been discussed this week, from U.S. relations with the rest of the world, with Greenland, with our own communities, and the government of Canada's approach to conversation about Arctic security, that our people, I think, in my own experience, my own view, and those 4 a.m. conversations on my patio with Chris talking about how we create our own laws, that our creative ability to solve complex issues that has been taught by the land, and that as we move forward, that stark reminder that the land has no prejudice, and as we move through these aspects of self-determination, that security, energy, food sovereignty, all of the projects that GCI is involved in through the working groups of the Arctic Council or even our individual communities are set by our own people.
That's the perfect segue into our next question as well, and final one. So you can sort of ignore the timer because we have another 20 minutes for questions, 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So we'll feel free to take the time to answer this one. But I'd ask you to share, after attending this week, both the Arctic Frontiers conference panels, the side meetings, and meetings around the Arctic Council. What are there questions that you're leaving with or reflections that you'll be bringing back home?
I know it's been said a dozen times, especially this conference, given everything that's going on in the world, but it's really striking how essential it is that we all do work together, especially on issues in the Arctic, because everything is so big that there's no way that any one state or people can take it on alone. And I just really appreciate how willing everyone is to work together, especially the PPs, and how it's not vote-based, it's all consensus. And yeah, it's just definitely something that I love to see and that I would really like to emulate, is that kind of capacity to work together no matter what personal beliefs are, what's going on in the larger state of the world. The Arctic in this situation is our priority, and I appreciate that everybody has stayed true to that.
I think the biggest learning lesson being here is that there is a lot of very important work going on in the Arctic, and there is money being directed towards these issues, and there's a lot of people working towards them. So with the right attention, a lot of progress can be made on these. I'm focused on the conservation issues, and as a paramedic, the wildfire emergency response initiatives are important to me as well. But there's serious things lacking to really make progress on those. The infrastructure, even to go to school, let alone have a fire department, just isn't there. And how much can you really do without that? So there's a lot to be done. And it's inspiring to see that things are being done, and it is possible to have that change completed.
For myself, as you all know, the Arctic Council's been sort of in a pause for a number of years in terms of in-person meetings, the formal meetings. And so getting to come to this conference and connect with people face-to-face has been really important. Being in beautiful Sapmi territory, and everything that's going on in the world, one thing that I'm coming away from this week with is a renewed sense of the importance of solidarity across the circumpolar north amongst Indigenous peoples. There's a late leader that came from Canada. His name was George Manuel Peoples, and he gave a speech in the 1970s where he talked about what he called the fourth world. And so not the first world or second world or third world, but the fourth world, referring to us Indigenous peoples who are within state boundaries, nation state boundaries, and how important it is to cultivate that solidarity across the circumpolar north, but with all Indigenous peoples around the globe, because of these things that we have in common and our common struggles. And so I'm really grateful to be able to connect with our colleagues from the other permanent participants, to hear what's going on in their territories, and understanding that we're not alone. in these struggles, that there is other Indigenous peoples working towards these common objectives, and that we have a lot to learn from each other still. And so that's what I'm taking away from this week.
I think for myself, it's I think I already said it earlier, which is that like it's just really great to see young people walking into these spaces, whether it be the Emerging Leaders Program. For those of you that may have participated in it, I was in the cohort, the second cohort, and that that we all continue to ensure that young people are invited into these spaces, that we create space for them, and that something that was taught to me by youth when I was working with youth back in the day, with the Gwich'in Regional Youth Council, which is that you can have campaign promises about all the things that you're going to do for youth, or you can actually listen and implement what they're asking for. And that's just, I'm so appreciative of both of the youth up here and all of the insight that you have, and it's a reminder of why I got into this work.
Thank you. So a big round of applause for our panelists. And now we have, 10, 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. I see hands. I'm going to steal one of your microphones.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sara Lilja from Finland, from small company, which is educating planetary well-being. And I started my Arctic collaboration with Indigenous in 2017 when Finland was the chair of Arctic Council. And I learned a lot from you about resilience. And then I learned that for community sense, building the arts are important issue. And I was very happy that you mentioned laughing and caring and sharing. I'm a teacher myself. So my question for you, relating to youth and children, I am working with Mina Viktiga project, where we have been walking in nature, and the children has been making things from the nature. So my question is for you, what is the role of music to build resilience in your communities?
Yeah, I would say that music is incredibly important for youth. And as someone who's kind of naturally shy, frankly, when I was in elementary school, I kind of dreaded classes where you were expected to perform for a bunch of people, right? But through the work of some organizations and stuff, we would have elders come from like Unitai or Arctic, and they'd come to my school and they'd teach us traditional dances and like songs and everything. And those were really fun moments because you're kind of like reconnecting with your culture in like a really fun and active way. And I feel like especially as a small child, being able to like actively do something while also engaging with your culture is really helpful. Just because you have so much energy and enthusiasm and you're kind of like shameless, right? And so it's just like a really good opportunity. And then when you learn these dances and everything so young, it kind of takes away any potential of like embarrassment for like when you do go to like big events and stuff like that, because like you've been doing this for forever, and so you feel very secure even if you're like a shyer person in kind of like doing the steps and like performing. It's never a source of embarrassment. So I feel like it's amazing.
Might just add to that music is pretty central. Music and dance, it's always been, when the fur traders came over, they brought the fiddle to Gwich'in territory, and we adopted the fiddle and our own style of jigging or dancing, which is still a very big part of the culture in all of our communities. But we've always gathered. We hear lots of stories about long ago people traveling, usually around Christmas time, winter time. When you weren't able to be out hunting. People coming together, bringing their best clothes, bringing their best food that they saved, their best slices of meat, and coming together and literally dancing to fiddle music for a week on end. Every day, all night, wake up and do it again. And just how important sharing music and dance helps maintain your sense of community, your sense of well-being, as well as your sense of community.
Hi, I'm Nadine Kaas. I'm from the University of Zurich and the Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy. And I wanted to thank you all for sharing your very moving stories as well and your insights that really need to be heard, in my opinion. But I also, when I heard your stories, it felt a bit, well, of course it is unjust, but it felt so unjust that you have to carry the weight of having to rebuild and having to put in effort that other communities might not have to do. And I was just wondering if that's also something that sometimes comes up in your in the aim of going back home, having to or trying to bring back what you learned in other places, or giving back instead of seeing what other young people that don't carry that responsibility, that can just go and live in their communities, will be fine in a sense because they don't have to worry about so many aspects that you and your communities might have to work. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but I was just wondering if that's also sometimes in your minds and how you deal with these thoughts.
Yeah, I mean it's I think it's a weight that where we come from, like Trump, so it's the Arctic, but it's nothing compared to home. We spent all of Christmas for 5 weeks in the Yukon, -30 to -60 weather, and our people had to make decisions quickly. And as I was sharing earlier, that the land has no prejudice. That this weight, I guess, that I feel like answering that question that I asked earlier has helped me alleviate the weight that I've had to carry from my parents and my grandparents and the family tree, right? But going home, I graduated on June 15th, 2005, and on a Friday, and I left Monday. I've never moved back. I go home every year. I've been going home a lot more the last couple of years, primarily because I want to bring my kids back home and show them where we're from and bring them in on the land and be little muddy kids running around in our community, and to meet all their cousins. But when you see all of that and you're reminded of the values that we just shared today, it's weightless.
Yeah, to me, it you can have those feelings of this is unjust, this is unfair, and sometimes you can dwell on that. But I find it's not a healthy place to dwell. What I said earlier about freedom and responsibility, other people might live an easier life. They might, not face the same difficulties or challenges we do where we live. But are they enjoying freedom? Do they enjoy, can they go up behind the village and look out off Crow Mountain and see nothing but land, no roads, no skyscraper, and just know that all of that is where you come from, where your ancestors survived. To me, that's what helps me move past those feelings. Is knowing that in order to maintain that comes with responsibility, and often I find Western society or culture, there's often a focus on rights. It's my right to have this, it's my right to do this, without a sense of that responsibility. And so I think focusing on responsibility helps cultivate, a willpower to persist.
Thank you very much. My name is Puya. I'm a Canadian lawyer. You spoke about Prime Minister Carney's new Arctic policy, and I guess something I'm wondering is the language of it has changed a lot. It's been shifted to security. There's a lot we can say about what's going on there, but the question really is, if you could ask for one thing from that policy that Canadians could bring for your communities, for your nations, what would it be?
I love this idea of going for investment bankers rather than giving up on politicians and going there. I love strategic thinking. I like this idea of global solidarity and building that. These are things that really resonate with me. And I'm wondering if you can discuss what the concept of fourth world does for you that is maybe different than other conceptualizations. Like, there's a shift to the word Indigenous so that it is more encompassing rather than having Aboriginals and Inuit and First Nations. So that's kind of like a solidifying term. So does fourth world do anything differently for you? And I'd like to know strategically how that operates. Thanks.
Are you Canadian?
I'm American.
Okay.
US American.
Okay. That's why I asked, because you just said sorry twice. And when you guys were both trying to figure out who was going to go first, I thought you're both Canadian for sure. You must live close to the Canadian border. I mean, I'll let Chris answer the fourth world question, but like the strategic thinking around going to investment banks was because of our partners, right? Like, it wasn't just an idea that Gwich'in came up with. It's all of the partners that the Gwich'in Steering Committee has and our people have in Alaska and Canada and that come up with creative ways for us to lobby. And I appreciate your question, but seeing all of the things that are coming to Inuvik, with forward operating bases being announced in Yellowknife and in Inuvik, that this is a reality. This is coming. I think seeing there's an RFP out right now from the Department of Defense for a bunch of work in the Beaufort Delta in my traditional territory. And to my initial comment earlier about the Gwich'in Comprehensive Land Claim Agreement and that Canada views it as a divorce and not a marriage is pretty clear because it's not even referenced in any material. And aside from Carney's Arctic policy, I think what I want more than a policy that's going to help shape the one thing that we want, I think, is just understanding and empathy that we are there, that we are self-determined people, that we are Gwich'in, and this distinctions-based approach that the federal government has had for the last 10 years. I was asked another really important question of around Gwich'in identity, that I'm Gwich'in, I'm not First Nation, I'm not Canadian, I'm Gwich'in, and that's what I would ask. And so I look forward to your blog post about that.
So I'll answer kind of both because I think they're related in a way. To me, when everyone probably in this room heard or read about Carney's speech in Davos and talking about the end of the rules-based international order, calling on essentially middle power nation states to unite, but talking about how this rules-based international order was a quote-unquote useful fiction that Canada followed along with, and there's a rupture in this order and something new is required. And it was a bit rich for me to hear as an Indigenous person in Canada because as a lawyer, you probably hear the refrain rule of law and how unequally or unevenly that term is applied, whether it is an Indigenous person resisting development that they didn't consent to. The rule of law means you're criminalized. But also the rule of law is our treaties, our land claims enshrined in the Constitution, now a federal law to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So one thing I think needs to be centered in whatever order we're talking about is Indigenous self-determination at the center of it. So, and that relates to the fourth world for me, or this concept, that all of these nation state leaders can gather in a place like Davos and conspire of what the new economic order is going to be, with a seeming invisibility of those of us who aren't nation states, but still who are still peoples. Just because we're maybe smaller in size, we're still a peoples, and whatever that order is, the fundamental equality of all peoples needs to be at the heart of it. And so for me, that term fourth world is a way to speak back as Indigenous peoples, as saying, we're not like you, but we're part of this conversation, and we need to be reckoned with on that basis.
All right. So, big messy show. I thank you to our panelists, to all of you for joining questions, and have safe travels home wherever you may be going.